So Jon Stewart, the former legendary host of The Daily Show, did a long-form interview with the New York Times earlier today. And guys, it's fantastic. He talks about so many different things, including his new movie starring Steve Carell. He's directing it. It's called Irresistible. But the main focus from my perspective was on the role of police in the United States, and specifically how Jon Stewart nails it when he says that the police, more or less, are functioning as they've been intended to function throughout American history. And that's why this situation is so concerning. The police aren't out of control. We're not being besieged by a few bad apples here and there. The police are operating as intended. That's the scary and disconcerting part. So Jon Stewart notes the following. He has a great quote in this article, and I want to read it to you in a couple parts. The police are a reflection of a society. They are not a rogue alien organization that came down to torment the black community. They're enforcing segregation. Segregation is legally over, but it never ended. The police are, in some respects, a border patrol, and they patrol the border between the two Americas. We have that so the rest of us don't have to deal with it. So, what he's saying is, if you're white especially, but also if you have economic means, if you're rich or well off, the police exist to protect you and your way of life. They build a border, real and imagined, around you, your community, your property, your neighborhoods, etc. And they exist to protect you. But African American people, other minorities, poor people, other disadvantaged folks, the police exist to keep them out of your border, to keep them out of your lands. And whenever those people rise up, demand equality, demand basic dignity, demand humanity, whether it's through a civil rights protest or whether it's through a labor strike, whenever those people on the wrong side of the border act up, show a desire to be seen as equal to their betters, quote unquote, the police will crack down at the border and they will put down these protests, sometimes directly and sometimes with great aggression. And we've seen this. We've seen this happen on an individual and collective basis when marginalized people stand up. And so Jon Stewart says, for those of us fortunate to be on the other side of the border, not only do the police protect us, but we don't see what they do more often than not. Then that situation erupts and we express our shock and indignation. But if we don't address the anguish of a people, the pain of being a people who built this country through forced labor, people say, quote, I'm tired of everything being about race. Well, imagine how bleeping exhausting it is to live that. So Jon Stewart, again, he's just putting it so perfectly. There are people in this country, black people in particular, who have been, for the entire history of the country, including today, basically second-class citizens, if not worse. And the police, at least in their modern formation, have been central in perpetuating and exacerbating that inequality and oppression. So we don't often see that. If you're on the other side of the barricade, you don't see that. But then you do every once in a while, whether it's because there's a big protest or something particularly egregious happens like Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd, or whether it's now because we have the technology that anybody with a smartphone can be, a photojournalist. We see it now, and we sort of just want it to go away because it's uncomfortable and inconveniencing. But this is a daily, generational reality for the most marginalized people on racial and economic terms. And Stewart says you're not going to get rid of it except by addressing the issue. And he goes on to say below that much like the police serve a social function, police excessive force does as well. Jon Stewart doesn't say so much that, you can't do anything to make police more accountable, but fundamentally the issue is that you give men this badge and this tool of force that they can use against people, this weapon of deadly force you can use against people, and then you just expect them to operate with decency and restraint. But fundamentally, the flaw here isn't in any way that a few bad apples are overturning the cart and spoiling all the apples in the cart. The fundamental flaw is the fundamental inequality of American society. And as long as that inequality exists, and there's a class of people on economic and racial terms that want to defend that status quo, the police will always have a role that centers around violence against regular working class people, against black people, indigenous people, Hispanic people, and other marginalized folks. That's fundamental. You cannot tweak your way around class conflict in America. You can't. And so Jon Stewart really gets that here. And look, I've not always agreed with Jon Stewart. For me, he's often too liberal. He's not socialist enough. He doesn't believe in the democratic socialist vision I have. Sometimes he's been too apt to both sides an issue. In the late 2000s, early 2010s, him and Stephen Colbert did their rally to restore sanity, which seemed to suggest that, whether it's the far left or the far right, they're being unreasonable, which is totally a misdiagnosis of how the United States society is actually operating and was back in 2010. But on the whole, we miss this man. We miss his, incarnation of The Daily Show. How sharp it was, how critical it was, how, cynical it was, but in a productive way more often than not. We sort of missed the same way we missed the Stephen Colbert Report. We still have Stephen Colbert every night, but he's a far different character, a far different satirist of American society right now on network TV than he was on the Colbert Report. And I feel like we really need to have these guys back, or have some kind of ability to bring their message back, because Jon Stewart, in this interview, this is just him sitting musing about a bunch of issues, cuts to the absolute core of why policing is bad in America. Again, policing isn't broken. It's working exactly as intended, and that's the problem.